So this is where we were. There are two consciousness and they have just realized that they are not alone. They were aware of their own existence, but they were not aware of the existence of other consciousness, right? So upon this realization, I was telling you, they are going to start establishing through a negative dialectic who and what they truly are. Hegel tells us that in order to gain that awareness, a twofold action in this life and death struggle must happen. Each one of the consciousness, each one of the awarenesses is going to seek the death of the other, and each one is going to stake its own life. So my kindergarten diagram looks something like this. We have these awarenesses that after colliding with one another, after realizing that they're not totally alone in the immediacies of life, are going to start defining themselves, right? So they have this sort of moment where they approach one another, and upon this realization, they become a little bit more certain every time of what it is they are. Hegel says that these awarenesses have to realize that annihilation is a possibility in this struggle. So when one of the consciousness realizes, or the consciousness realizes, is that life is essential to it as pure self-consciousness. If I die, I have no self-consciousness. I have nothing, right? So this fear of death is somehow going to play a huge part in how we define ourselves, how we become this I that we so easily and quickly bestow upon ourselves and others. So these self-consciousness, upon these encounterings through which they have been defining each other, they also realize, damn it, if I if I die, there's nothing else for me here. So do I keep staking my life and maybe lose it? Or do I stop and try to gain life, but what would the result of that be? So Hegel says that one of the consciousness decides that it's going to keep staking life and see what happens, right? Like, here I am, this is my move. And the other one says, you know what, forget about it. I I am going to just save my life, and I realize that I am in a dependent relation here, that I am no longer a consciousness that is totally and only for itself. So this is where a pure self-consciousness arises, and then there's another one that is a mediated consciousness. So Hegel tells us that this consciousness that we left here, because it took its life to the next level, right? And it was willing to risk maybe just for one more stab, maybe just for one more hit. But because it did that move, this is going to become the Lord. So the Lord is the consciousness that exists for itself. But that, in a weird way, it means that it cannot exist only itself. It exists for itself as if it didn't require somebody else's recognition for its existence, right? Whereas the other consciousness, the one that we're going to term the bondsman or the slave, is a consciousness that is mediated, that wasn't willing to die. It didn't subdue itself to that pain of dying. Instead of it cling to life. So because this decision, the servant acquires his or her identity through work. And the master What the master has power over is the slave. So it creates this really interesting diagram, which is what I was showing you before, where this first consciousness is the master, the Lord. The Lord acquires his consciousness as someone who has power over somebody else, but who relationally needs to have the slave. If the master has no slave, the master can't be a master of anyone. The slave, it's it's subdued its autonomy, its potential to the master. But in order to gain from the world, Hegel tells us that the master appropriates nature. The slave appropriates nature in such a way that the master can now use it. So this is going to be something that looks like this. In the immediacies of life, when the master-slave relation dichotomy exists, we're going to have that the slave is dependent upon the master in a direct way. But the master is dependent upon the slave in an indirect way, because it is through the slave that the master can appropriate nature. So after this moment, both of them can claim that they exist, that they are for themselves, that they have this recognition of where they start, where they begin, and where they end. They're not going to morph into anything else. They're solid in their identities, except that these identities, Hegel doesn't see it as a problem, but Marx will. These identities condemn them to a certain kind of life, right? So, thinking that this presentation has been clear, you have two potential activities for extra credit. One of them is to watch this video from The Dark Knight Rises. And ever since I saw it, I was like, hey, this moment here, this is Hegel, right? This idea of trying to escape from prison, of trying to conquer a moment of absolute recognition, to me, it's definitely linked to the Hegelian idea that we were just discussing. And then, if that's not enough, because you want more extra credits and you think that Hegel is really awesome, which I obviously think Hegel is very awesome, although painful, I also claim that Quentin Tarantino is using master slave in his most recent film, Django Unchained. Obviously, this is up for interpretation. You can agree or you can disagree with me. As long as you give me a good argument as to why you are taking either of these positions, I will consider giving you 5 extra credit points. It means that you may not gain anything. It means that you may gain all 5 points. It could be that your interpretation is so cool that I decide to give you more extra credit points. But in order to gain that opportunity, see the Hegelian here, you will have to stake your own opinion. Not your points. You're really not losing anything. But maybe you want to check if you are a smart student and whether or not you can put these arguments together. And that's one way in which we stake our life in the classrooms, right? In the academic life. Okay, so this has been my Hegel lecture. I will obviously come back to Hegel when I'm doing Marx. In Marx, all we're going to read is a selection in which he talks about 4 different kinds of alienation. And I'll relate those 4 different kinds of alienation to the Hegelian concepts that we have studied here. Okay? If you have any questions, please let me know. Send me an email, post on Blackboard. I'm here. Have a good one.